for bringing more users on chain that now are using Bonk or USDC or Orca or Jupiter, therefore introducing more transaction on Solana itself, even if some of those transactions are being performed perhaps in an ephemeral rollup. The core mission of MagicBlock is to bring more users to Solana by means of enabling these different use cases that are not possible on Solana right now, and therefore contributing to adding more value because now those users are going to transact on the network.
This episode is sponsored by Sei, the parallel execution EVM compatible layer 1 with sub-second finality. Incentives for users are coming to Sei this month from teams like DragonSwap. Start farming on Sei today by visiting dragonswap.app. We'll hear more from Sei later in the show. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. Today we're very excited to have Andrea Fortunio, who's the CEO of MagicBlock, which is a Solana gaming company that people are really excited about. I think whenever I ask people about just the state of crypto gaming, Solana gaming, MagicBlock tends to come up. They're building a game engine that makes use of this kind of novel technology called Ephemeral Rollups, which we'll get into. And by the time this episode drops, it'll have been announced that they also raised some funding, including participation from A16Z through their crypto startup accelerator program. We're very excited to have Andrea on today. Thanks for coming on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be on the pod.
How has Singapore been so far for you? Is it kicked off or is it pretty chill so far?
Very busy, but very exciting as well. I love Breakpoint, so it's great timing to reconnect with a lot of good folks and people that we've been working with. So yeah, it's just a great time.
And you're in Singapore right now, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So I was seeing all these pictures on Twitter yesterday of like long lines for a Barachain event or something. Like, were you around there, or what was the deal with that?
No, like totally not. Like, I'm glad I wasn't there, but yeah, I've seen those pictures. I was in the office, to be honest. So
oh, okay.
Yeah, pretty fun to see.
In founder mode, as they say.
Founder mode, absolutely.
Yeah, I was for a second I was going to be coming to Singapore on this flight that. Did you see all the videos of kind of the like crypto flight that they chartered from Dubai? Yeah, I was chatting with them about coming on that flight, and after seeing the videos, I was like, man, I am glad I did not sit through 10 hours of that. I'm sure it wasn't them singing and yelling and sweating for 10 hours, but that looked like a lot. But yeah,
intense for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of fun shenanigans to come and fun announcements as well. So, getting into it a bit here, Andrea, I guess I gave a brief introduction, but for viewers who just might not be as familiar, MagicBlock is a game engine. So just explain what that means and sort of what kinds of what part of the gaming industry you're hoping to enable.
Yeah, for sure. So MagicBlock is, as we call it, a high-performance engine for fully on-chain games and fully on-chain applications. So you can use our stack to build any sort of application that is running entirely on-chain. And the reason why we are excited about enabling those sorts of experiences is that you can supercharge some of these consumer experiences with features like persistency, permissionless composability, that you don't really get if you're building off-chain system, if you have a server or some sort of centralized component that enable those games or applications. So we cover a big part of the stack, pretty much end-to-end, but the biggest innovation that we bring to the table is definitely Ephemeral Rollups. Ephemeral Rollups is, I guess, a Solana extension. It's a way for developers to build on Solana and then delegate, offload, on demand some of their transaction if they need and when they need it to these fast SVM instances that are deployed all over the world. So it's basically a way for developers to get real-time latency and customization at the runtime level without having to leave Solana or without having to use an L2.
Yeah, so I'm excited to dive into ephemeral rollups in a second, but maybe before we do that, I just want to back up and ask, like, why do games need to be fully on chain? Because I feel like there's a lot of crypto games out there that sort of have these off-chain and on-chain elements. So what's the benefit to a game of running fully on-chain?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I started working in crypto, I found myself working with some of the largest game studios that were coming on chain. We were doing bridging, and we facilitated a lot of onboardings and token exchanging across different chains. But what happened in 2021 through the previous cycle is that fundamentally games started to use tokens or NFT and tokenize assets, right? So that the whole narrative was around ownership. But if you think about it, there's already a pretty big market. In fact, it's bigger in terms of volume with traditional skins and traditional digital items that players trade and own, and they don't feel really the need to use an NFT to own that thing. And so I think there's something more that a blockchain can bring to games than just ownership. I think ownership is important. I think everyone is pretty excited about that, but it's not the only feature, definitely. And so as I start to sort of dig deeper into some of these property, I found a few games. Like the first one was probably Dark Forest, and Dark Forest was an entirely on-chain game that for the first time showed how permissionless composability could alter the dynamic of the game. So if the whole game is built as a smart contract, it is essentially an open platform. So everybody can build on top of that game. They can introduce new level, new progression system. They can build prediction market that could resolve without the need of an oracle. There could be any sort of new customization or extension on top, which is pretty cool. It took Roblox 20 years to get to a stage where the user-generated content was really significant and was bringing in new players. Instead, with a fully on-chain game, you sort of get those features by default from day zero. And then the other interesting feature is verifiability or trustless compute. So any sort of high stakes game doesn't really have to rely on a centralized party to operate. I have plenty of friends that onboarded into crypto and find out about Bitcoin because Full Tilt, the poker site that they were playing, was banned and they lost all of their money. So there's also a lens and an angle that enable financial games. So any sort of casino, but you can also think of esports, like any games that have some sort of high or value at stake is a good fit to be built on chain. And then the last feature that I think it's interesting is persistency. So is the ability to deploy a game once and then not having to think about DevOps at all. The blockchain is your server effectively, and that game is going to exist forever, which obviously leaves the door open to digital experiences that can last forever, which is a super interesting idea, and that's probably something not new there. So overall, during our journey, we figure out that some of these property were only possible for games that were built entirely on chain. And so as we start to build some of those games ourselves, we got pretty excited about those experiences, and we decided to build like the full stack that could bring those experiences, that could enable those experiences in terms of a completely brand new category potentially of games.
Interesting. So I've covered like crypto gaming on and off throughout my time at Blockworks, and something I've noticed is that video games take a long time to build, and so there's just a lot of games that are doing like lots of marketing and PR, but they're nowhere near ready for actual users to play with them. I have a banger tweet in the drafts that I just need, like it's like 90% of the way there about this, where it's like gaming companies announcing their like private gated DevNet coming in, Q2 2025. So I'm just curious, are there examples out there? You mentioned Dark Forest as like a fully on-chain game that you had played. Are there examples out there currently of fully on-chain games that users are playing that you think illustrate the benefits of this?
Yeah, I mean, Dark Forest was really the first one. I think a better example would be Pirate Nation, which is a fully on-chain game built by the same team that originally built Farmville. And what happened with Farmville is that they were building on top of Facebook, and when Facebook changed their API, they were basically screwed, and they had to change their whole business model because they were relying on this centralized platform to operate. So it's funny that that same team is now building a fully on-chain game. They have this very playful sort of aesthetic to it. But the point is that they are building this autonomous war or this unstoppable forever game that they're sure is not going to get banned or stopped by anybody. Another one, most recent news is EVE Online. EVE Online has been one of the best games over the past 20 years. They have millions of players. The average players of EVE Online have more saving than the average US household. That stat is crazy. And they are building a fully on-chain version of EVE called EVE Frontier, previously called Project Awakening. And so it's that is an established studio that is moving into these sort of new experiences to tap into the exact same feature that we were discussing about.
Yeah, and I sort of ask because as you're describing your business, it strikes me that the success of MagicBlock is in some ways dependent on the success of the Solana gaming industry in general. Like if there's not compelling games to play on Solana, then there won't be funded developers to build using the game engine. So I guess like, how much do you think about just the success of the Solana gaming industry in general as you are sort of trying to build out MagicBlock as a company?
Yeah, so for sure, I think that games are a great way to onboard new people into crypto. But at the same time, if you think about it, a lot of the properties that I was mentioning before really applies to other application. If you think of what happened with FTX, it was pretty much the same problem. Like users were trusting a centralized party with their funds, right? Which is the same of the story with the poker side with my friends. So ultimately, it's the same problem. So what MagicBlock is doing is building the foundational infrastructure to enable not only fully on-chain games, but also these brand new category of applications that have share the same properties. So what you can build with our stack is better central limit order book or application that run entirely on chain and can get more easily customized. And of course, fully on-chain games are one of the better example, I think. It's definitely where most of our focus is right now. But we're not exclusively about games in that games are more often than not, games are at the technological frontier, and the tech that you build for game then end up enabling a whole other bunch of applications. Think about NVIDIA, for example. They really built a GPU initially to enable shaders in video games, and now they're powering AI because they added so much computational capacity that now they're powering high demanding compute applications. And so I think we're sort of on a similar path where blockchain right now are really like slow databases in a way, and the more compute you add and the more application you enable that have real-time latency and customization in the way that developers can build them is gonna be important not only for games but for many other applications as well. So I definitely love to see the gaming ecosystem on Solana succeed, but I think the tech that we're building goes way beyond just video games.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's like if you can do these really compute intensive tasks on chain through the kind of ephemeral rollup innovation, then surely there's other ways you could, apply doing intensive things on chain outside of gaming. I feel like that's so often the hang up for crypto projects is it's just expensive to use a blockchain. And so if you can, that was the issue with a lot of these like AI and crypto projects is like, why should AI be running on chain? It's insanely expensive. So that's a fair point. I guess just one other point on the gaming business. As I think about the world we live in right now and the crypto games that have succeeded up to date, in 2024, it's a lot of like tap to earn or much more rudimentary games. So like probably the biggest success story still is Axie Infinity, uh, which is terrible, like not very good UX. But when I think about MagicBlock and maybe what you're describing, it sounds a lot more like AAA, very high budget, uh, you know, deeply developed kind of games. So I'm curious, like, are there thoughts about going into mobile or into less kind of uh, rigorously developed games, or are you really going to focus on like Assassin's Creed on chain type of thing?
What we see right now is that studios building the highly polished AAA games are studios that are coming from a traditional gaming background, and they are integrating the chain for the assets. So they're integrating Solana for NFT, or maybe the AVA token. And so typically we support them with some of our open source libraries, like the Solana Unity SDK, for example. But whereas fully on-chain games are more experimental in a way. So typically is the smaller studios that can afford to take more risk, or indie developers that build those experiences. And definitely, I think mobile is going to be pivotal to popularize some of those games. I'm so bullish on Saga 2. I cannot wait to see what happens when those 100,000 devices, whatever number they manage to sell, is gonna start shipping, and they get into the hands of users, and we start to have more consumer experiences, namely games, on that app store. So definitely, we're really big on our mobile strategy. We did the integration with the Saga team early on in terms of supporting Unity with Saga. And I think that is going to be an excellent distribution channel for these experiences. But typically, like that's how this sort of dichotomy that we see in the market between studios coming from a traditional gaming background versus studios that are more crypto native and can play around with this sort of more experimental tech stack.
The Sei network brought parallel execution to the EVM with their V2 update this past spring. Sub-second finality and massive throughput are now available to EVM developers everywhere on Sei's high-performance Layer 1. Incentives for users are coming to Sei this month from teams like DragonSwap. Start farming on Sei today by visiting dragonswap.app. That's dragonswap.app. Thanks again to Sei for sponsoring today's episode. Yeah, so with a little bit of that introduction, I guess we should dive into Ephemeral Rollups, which is really MagicBlock's calling card and what it's come to be known for. I guess maybe a place to start that's a little silly, but there was a video that like demo that you posted, I don't know, a couple months ago that went pretty viral. I feel like I've seen it several times, and just people in the online Solana world were very excited about this. So, and it shows like a character moving around in a game on the top half of the screen, and then the bottom half of the screen is like a CLI spitting out a bunch of code. So, can you just explain that video, like what's happening and how that sort of explains what an ephemeral rollup is doing?
For sure. I think that was sort of the aha moment of like everyone realizing what ephemeral rollup can do. But to take a step back, the reason why we started on this whole journey of thinking how we could reduce latency on chain is because we were building fully on chain game ourselves. And after one or two, we realized that the UX was just really, really bad. Solana is amazing for providing composability. And so if you think of experiences that are predicated upon the fact that anybody can build on top, they can compose with DeFi, they can compose with any smart contract, then Solana makes a lot of sense. But then if every interaction is a transaction, half a second is pretty bad UX for most games. Like, players get pissed off if they have a 100 millisecond latency. So forget half a second. And so we didn't want to really build a rollup either, because there's no point in doing that. You're fragmenting the liquidity. You're moving away from user-based developers. You're losing access to state. And so we came out with this idea that you can leverage the SVM and its feature in order to delegate and move only part of the state temporarily into a faster node, into a faster SVM node. So what we did is we almost rewrote from scratch a Solana node. We started before Anza started to modularize the SVM. So we started from the 1.17 validator client. We remove a bunch of Rust crates. We really optimize the execution environment. So the ephemeral validator doesn't have gossip, doesn't have consensus. We remove all of those overheads, and we just focused on execution. And so what developer can do is that they can build a smart contract on Solana as they would do normally. They can run transaction there, but when they need it, they can delegate. They can interact with an on-chain smart contract, and a node will pick up the request, will clone the state into this ephemeral validator. And from that point onward, you can write on that state in the ephemeral rollup, and you cannot write on the state on Solana, because that state on Solana gets locked. So you have this way of cloning that particular state, and now you can run transaction there much faster. Not only because the execution environment itself has been optimized, but also because you can co-locate the node close to the user. So by means of co-location, what you're doing is you're reducing the network latency effectively. You're not bound by consensus anymore. And so you can achieve, with the execution plus the networking, you achieve a latency that is around 50 milliseconds. So it's more than enough for real-time multiplayer games. And from there on, you run transaction on Solana for the state that is, still there and unlocked. You run transaction in the ephemeral rollup for the states that are locked on Solana and delegated into the ephemeral rollup, and everything is abstracted away. So what was happening in that video is that the position state of the player was delegated in the ephemeral rollup, and therefore the character was running around, and what you saw in the terminal were the transaction logs. But then what happens in the video is that we capture a gem and we mint this token, and we show that the token gets minted directly on Solana. And that is because the mint itself is happening on Solana. So you have this way to selectively decide what you keep on Solana and what you temporarily move into the ephemeral rollup for the execution part. So all in all, what it does is it allows developers to build their application the same way that they would do on Solana, benefiting from composability and deep liquidity and DeFi and payments and all of that good stuff. But then if and when they need, they can tap into this faster execution environment, which, by the way, can also be customized to the specific applications that they are serving. So you could have loops, for example, which is something that typically games need to, perform physical computation or to simulate the passage of time. So there's a whole bunch of customization that you can add to the ephemeral validator, but again, while maintaining the composability with the base layer.
That's a good overview. It almost strikes me as a similar insight to like ZK compression. If you've been following this on Solana, I think there's an announcement coming from them today. I have to check my Telegram, but sort of the same insight that the state on Solana is kind of customizable and that it's separated out in a way that it's not in Ethereum, leads to some like really interesting kind of potential things like ephemeral rollups. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. Ephemeral rollups are enabled by this native separation of state and logic that's the SVM has compared to the EVM. And the way to think about it is that ZK compression reduces the storage cost of accounts. Ephemeral rollups reduce the compute cost. So it's a way to achieve potentially cheaper and more scalable compute, reduce the latency by means of co-location of the nodes, and tap into specialized execution environments, again, on demand. So only when you need it without having to deploy your smart contract on an L2 or having to leave Solana ever.
Yeah, and then my understanding is it's a fraud-proof system, so it would work like Arbitrum or like Optimism on Ethereum, kind of in terms of like the roll-up side of it.
It's a slightly modified fraud-proof system in the sense that you can potentially prove the whole session, but in practice, zero knowledge validity proof are still not performant enough. And so we came up with this idea of a dynamic fraud proof where developers can specify a fraud proof window, and then any honest party can raise a challenge. But additionally, you have a set of nodes that are they can be light clients that are sampling and verifying that the node is not cheating, and they have to sign off the state before it gets finalized. So what happens is whenever a user or a developer wants to roll the state back from the ephemeral validator to Solana because they want to unlock some other operations there, they request a commitment. The validator, the ephemeral validator, posts a commitment of a state diff that is not finalized just yet. So these additional light clients have to sign off the state commitment and basically signaling that they are not raising a challenge and everything happened correctly and the validator is not cheating. And only when the threshold of signature is reached and the challenge window elapsed, then the state becomes final. So it's still a fraud-proof system because any honest party can raise the challenge, and then you enter into the dispute game, and you have to resolve that dispute game through a ZK. But assuming that everything happens correctly as it should be in an optimistic system, you need to wait for these light clients to verify that the validator did anything wrong, basically. And so only at that point, the state becomes final. So it's a slightly modified fraud-proof system in the sense that you have this dynamic challenge period. And the reason behind it is that we don't want to wait 7 days before that state becomes final. There's no reason, from first principle why, or like really any technical reason why the fraud-proof window is 7 days. It's just that it's sort of a social construct. There is enough time for any honest party to raise a challenge, and if something wrong happens, then you can socially coordinate to fork the system. Instead, if you are reducing the fraud-proof window, you're decreasing the probability that some honest party is raising a challenge. But that's why you need the light clients to actively be monitoring and watching, acting as watchtower to keep the node that is running that ephemeral rollup session in check, and then sign off that state commitment before it can get finalized. So yeah, that's kind of the system that we design in order to have good security properties in the ephemeral rollup, because obviously whenever you are delegating the state there, you are effectively trusting this centralized validator that doesn't have consensus to behave honestly, except that if you have the additional security committee, then you don't have to trust the node anymore. The light clients are incentivized to act as watchtower, and they will get a reward if the node is misbehaving.
Okay, so I want to bring this back to like the video game level then. So I'm playing a game, and sort of like my understanding is a little bit that some things in fully on-chain games are going to need ephemeral rollups. Some things Solana will do well enough, and you won't need an ephemeral rollup. So is the idea that if you start doing some very intensive thing. I don't know what that would be in a game. I can't come up with an example off the top of my head, but that MagicBlock's engine will create an ephemeral rollup, and then that's like one rollup that's sort of has data being added to it for as long as you're playing the game, and then when you turn off your console, the data gets posted to the layer one, or like, I guess just at the connection to the video game level, how does all of that function?
Yeah, so first of all that we described so far happens behind the hood. Like, users don't really feel any of this, but by default, we think that you should be running games Stargate on Solana, except that when you need low latency, namely 50 millisecond latency, the block time is 400 millisecond right now. It would probably get to 150 millisecond or around that. That latency is still not low enough to justify a smooth UX if players have to perform transaction at every game interaction. And so for multiplayer game, fast-paced PvP game, you might need an ephemeral rollup, but you can only move the state of the position, for example, and you keep all the other high-value transactions such as tokens, payments, NFT on Solana itself. So you don't have to bridge, you don't have to do anything. You just temporarily delegate that state into the ephemeral rollup. So from that point onwards, if a player is playing from Singapore, it will access a node that is co-located close to that area of the world. So you can also reduce the network latency, which, by the way, is exactly what happens with traditional multiplayer game server. They have this way of cluster users around geographical areas. And then at that point, they will just play the game. They don't need to bridge. They don't need to use different wallets. They don't need to, use different payment method. They can reuse whatever is currently available on Solana. It's just that whenever they are changing the position of their players, that particular piece of state will change in the ephemeral rollup. That's the only difference. But you don't even notice it. Everything is abstracted away from you. And that's a technical reason for it. And then whenever let's say that someone win a game, they want to get their NFT or they want to get their payout, whatever, then that's where the whole kind of security committee has to intervene, because at that point you have to prove that the move that have been performed by the validator are indeed correct. And so at that point, when there's a request to commit that position state back on chain, then the whole security committee verified that the state is indeed correct. The light clients sign off the state commitment. And then at that point, you can trigger, an NFT reward on Solana. If you are, again, doing a payment, you can run it through Solana perfectly fine. If you are minting an NFT, you will do it through Solana instead. There's no reason to use an ephemeral rollup. There's no reason to really move that state away from Solana. And the other important idea is that also the smart contract are on Solana themselves. So if you are updating the state every now and then, someone using an existing RPC can still read that state because it's the same data. It's just an account that has been locked and now it's updated. Yeah, that's how we envision really ephemeral rollup working in the context of a game. And in this example, I was discussing about the position of a player, but if you extend that view, then you can have really like a broad variety of system being built on top of this technology. You could have a central limit order book, for example, that have liquidity on Solana, but then run the matching engine on these ephemeral rollups. I was reading a tweet from Toli who was mentioning that it would be cool to have different instances around the world that could run at 10 millisecond and where users can submit this bid and ask, and you then have a way to resolve those order book, those matching engine on chain, and the liquidity stays on Solana. So that is something that ephemeral rollups are uniquely equipped to enable, because it's the exact same setting. Is co-location of the nodes, really fast execution without having to leave the chain, and you're only moving, in that case, your bid and ask into the ephemeral rollups while you're maintaining your liquidity on Solana itself.
And one other thing I think we should add is the term ephemeral just means like temporary. It's called an ephemeral rollup because it's not always in this state of running the rollup, right? So it can kind of, disappear and just turn into regular Solana, and then a temporary rollup can be spun up during these moments where you need low latency. That's kind of why it's called an ephemeral rollup, right?
Correct. In a way, they're almost stateless. The state that is in the ephemeral rollup is a clone of state that exists on Solana. You cannot create new accounts in the ephemeral rollup. You always have to create an account on Solana first, and then you can mirror that state, run some state transition, and then update the original account with that updated state. That's what an ephemeral rollup does. And just in time is another term that you can use. Basically, we want to stress the idea that you could use these systems only if and when you need them. So you could also have a way to dynamically offload some transaction whenever there's some hot state, for example. If a smart contract or an account gets more than a certain amount of requests per second, then you offload some of those transactions in the ephemeral rollup, and then whenever congestion is solved, you wind that session down and you're fine. So they're quite versatile, and we think it's really one of the best way to preserve the composability of Solana, and without ever needing to leave Solana itself.
So a criticism that's sometimes made by Solana people of the Ethereum layer 2 ecosystem is that a lot of these L2s, which is where a lot of the sort of transaction volume in the Ethereum world happens now, are at some level controlled by like multi-sigs that you need to trust, that they're being honest and they're not going to screw you over. So I'm just curious, like running a similar kind of optimistic roll-up system while at the same time talking about the ability to permissionlessly create on top of games, and that games should run fully on chain for all of the kind of benefits that creates. Like, is there a tension there to you, or how do you think through the kind of security implications of running like an optimistic fraud-proof system to make on-chain games happen?
Yeah, for sure. So the whenever you are delegating or accelerating some transaction within an ephemeral rollup, you have to make sure that there is a security and all the trust assumption in place to make sure that you're not really trusting a centralized party. The point is that the system is completely opt-in, so you could use that same game entirely on Solana for certain type of games, especially fast-paced PvP games. The performances might be degraded, but you can still play with that game without having to trust a counterparty if you really want. And even if you're temporarily trusting that counterparty, you're not really trusting it if there's this system of nodes in place that make sure that the validator is not cheating. And I didn't mention that MagicBlock aims to be a permissionless and open source system. So right now, the node is not open source just yet, but we will open source the node. And at that point, anybody will be able to run their own node or run nodes for their own users if they want, and really contribute to this extension, quite literally, of the network. Again, on demand and only when there's need. It's a completely opt-in system. You don't have to use it if you don't want. It's just a way to extend what Solana cannot do, which again, minimizing the latency by means of co-location or having specialized execution environment for applications. So yeah, that's kind of the answer there. And it's not to say that, again, we don't have to take security seriously. We obviously have to make sure that the nodes are being kept in check by this system of light clients that sample and verify the transaction, and the node will get slashed. They have to have some economic bond in order to, some other party to be incentivized to run those checks. So yeah, that's kind of a balancing act, but we think it's one of the best trade-off that you can do if you're introducing additional off-chain compute. Because again, you don't deploy your smart contract on an ephemeral rollup. Your smart contract are always going to be on Solana, and you're always going to be to transact on Solana as you would do normally.
Mm-hmm. And so that maybe can be a window into just more broadly. I was preparing for this episode and thinking a bit about how there's different ways to think about, like there's kind of broad agreement that you can't do fully on-chain games just like on Ethereum or something, because the latency would just be too high. But there's other versions of kind of what MagicBlock is doing with different theses. So there's Sonic SVM is one that comes to mind, which uses the SVM but calls itself a layer 2, and I believe it settles to Ethereum. I'm not entirely sure. There's also immutable zkEVM, which is building this kind of zero knowledge layer 2 for gaming. So I guess just, do you like, maybe I'll start with, why don't you just build a layer 2, and why are you building the kind of roll up that doesn't exist outside of Solana instead?
Yeah, again, we don't think L2 make much sense in the sense that you're really fragmenting the ecosystem. And we've seen these empirically through the lenses of the Ethereum ecosystem, where you used to have this amazing and vibrant environment where everybody was building and contributing and playing around with DeFi and all of that good stuff. And then all of a sudden you have like 50, 100 different L2s, like you're fragmenting the mindshare. User base is really like, it's not clear what is the chain that you should go on. It's not clear for the developers, different programming languages, different stacks, different trust assumption. It's a mess. We love the idea of a single state machine. We love the idea of having everything on the same layer. We have been on Solana since pre-FTX, so we are all on board with the vision that Solana have. But at the same time, we recognize that there are some limitations that a general purpose VM cannot address for specific kind of applications, or in order to have these really low level of latency. That's probably that even the Solana with like in the its last kind of form cannot achieve. And so the point of building ephemeral rollups rather than an L2 is precisely to extend Solana capabilities and introduce new use cases that could build on Solana and leverage those amazing features that Solana have, rather than being extractive or to build our own thing, but then having to rebuild an ecosystem from scratch. You would need to bridge, you would need to, ask Circle to issue native USDC there. Like it would be a complete mess. Like we are really not much into that.
Will there ever be a MagicBlock native token, or are you planning on staying just with Solana as the sort of token for the game engine?
So the token is serving to bootstrap the node operators. The node operators that are gonna provide this additional compute for the Solana developers. So tokens have proven to be an amazing distribution channel, or like rather than distribution channel, bootstrapping mechanism for node operators since the Bitcoin basically. And so that is the one of the main reasons why I think a token would make sense. But then the in terms of what users should use, ephemeral rollups are meant to look and feel like an extension to Solana, quite literally. So they should always use native assets. They shouldn't have to bridge. They should use Sol. And if you're alluding at the fact that we could potentially be extractive to the ecosystem, the point is that if you're introducing and enabling use cases that are not possible because the latency isn't there, or because you don't have the ability to customize the runtime, you're bringing more users on chain that now are using Bonk or USDC or Orca or Jupiter, and they're therefore introducing more transaction on Solana itself, even if some of those transactions are being performed perhaps in an ephemeral rollup. So I think the end goal and like one of the core mission of MagicBlock is really to be to bring more users to Solana by means of enabling these different use cases that are not possible on Solana right now, and therefore contributing to adding more value, because now those users are going to transact on the network and they're going to pay with USDC or Bonk or interacting with the smart contract and protocols that are on the chain.
Yeah, that was why I was asking a bit, is that the sort of layer 2 versus network extension debate that's being had by some nerds in the Solana and Ethereum world. A lot of it comes down to the fact that like the Ethereum layer 2s sort of arguably accrue value to their native token rather than to ETH. And so the kind of economic value of the Ethereum layer 1 is limited by the fact that a lot of like fees are being paid to these L2 sequencers. And so, yeah, I was asking for that reason about the native token, because if MagicBlock was driving value to its token instead of to Solana, then there is maybe that parasitic relationship. But yeah, you sort of explained that a bit. With our last couple of minutes here, Andrea, I just wanted to ask about, I guess, like, firstly, you released this demo video. We've talked a lot about what you're building. I'm just curious, what are the timelines for things like when are you going to be to market? When do you think we'll start seeing fully on-chain games that are being built with the MagicBlock engine?
Yeah, we're about to release on mainnet with a whitelisted version of Ephemeral Rollups, and we have a lineup of games that are gonna announce pretty soon. And so you're gonna be able to test the Ephemeral Rollups yourself and play with some of those games on Solana mainnet. And so leveraging tokens that are on Solana, but also with the extra capabilities of real-time performances that Ephemeral Rollup introduced. So yeah, pretty excited times for when it comes to seeing some of these games in action.
What is what's the biggest source of delay, or just what's the most time-consuming part of building MagicBlock?
You mean from we 90% of our engineering has been focused on improving the execution environment of the node of the ephemeral validator. We recently published a containerized version of the node that weighs 47 megabytes, so super lightweight. And at the same time, if you run it locally against a Solana node, you'll see that it is about 15, 20 times faster, just because we really optimize the execution environment. And then there's a bunch of other developer tooling, developer tools that we have to build out in order to allow developers to really just build on Solana as they would normally do, and then not having to think about, even changing RPC. But whenever they interact with the Onchain program, which is a delegation program, they can tap into this extra capacity and extra capabilities that Ephemeral Rollups provide. So that has been most of our engineering effort so far.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And like, how much of your time goes into just developing MagicBlock versus finding games to actually serve as like clients and build with the engine?
Yeah, so I'm pretty proud that so far we spent zero time reaching out to games. And so we've seen a good amount of demand, from some of the game jams that we organize, or we are recently sponsoring Radar, the Colosseum Global Hackathon. And so we are really seeing excitement in terms of not only games, but also in terms of other applications and how they want to not move into an L2, but really use the Ephemeral Rollups to stay on Solana and get those additional capabilities. And then from now on, we want to start creating some of these experiences ourselves. We think that we are obviously uniquely equipped we understand deeply the tech stack, and so we really want to build some of those consumer experiences ourselves. And at the same time, we will start reaching out to studios that are outside of the Solana ecosystem. Now that we're seeing CCP and EVE Online starting to build some of these fully on-chain games, we think that the times are ripe enough to really onboard a whole other bunch of users on Solana itself.
Just out of curiosity, do you play video games in your spare time these days, or is it like, I need a break from that world, I'm not gonna, play games when I'm not working?
Yeah, these days it's mostly about finding out what is the latest fully on-chain game out there, and sometimes I play Halo, but yeah, not much time to do that, honestly.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's been a while since I played Halo, man, but what a fun game.
Amazing.
So I'm also curious to hear, I think listeners would be interested in MagicBlock went through the A16Z crypto startup accelerator, which is a pretty sort of prestigious accelerator that they do, I think, twice a year. And A16Z has, very deep like crypto investments, but maybe less so in recent times. And I think people are just always interested in what Andreessen's thinking, because it is such a huge venture fund. So I just wanted to ask, like, what was the A16Z accelerator like? How was the experience?
Well, the whole A16Z team has deep expertise on the operational side of things. So what you got if you join the accelerator is basically the ability to interact with their team of cryptographers, researcher, engineers, marketers, lawyers, you name it. So it's a deeply kind of foundational experience for an early stage startup. It definitely helps us a lot. And then at the same time, it's very cool to see that the whole A16Z is super bullish on games and gaming, and so they invested in a bunch of fully on-chain games themselves. They invested in the two that I named before, Parent Nation and Eve, and so yeah, they've been amazing partners so far, and I'm sure they will keep helping us in different shapes and forms. So highly recommended for any like early stage startup out there, for sure.
Yeah. From the conversations you had with people over there, like what does the bullishness on crypto gaming stem from? Like, what's their thesis for why it's a good place to invest their money and hope for venture size returns?
So like games are one of the way through which you can really onboard a lot of users by means of this additional level of ownership that digital assets provide. That's sort of the simpler thesis. And then if you go on a deeper level, you start reasoning around those ideas that we were talking about before. So these digital realities that can persist forever, as soon as our AI overlords are going to take over as humans, we'd have to find out ways to spend our time. And like games have been evolving in really interesting way. There are these very pervasive experiences. They're gonna keep increasing in terms of fidelity, and also in terms of kind of more active digital experiences compared to, let's say, watching Netflix. And so they're more interactive, of course. And so yeah, it's just both on a kind of broader societal level, and then also just in terms of ability to onboard the next wave of consumers into crypto. If you think about it, 2017, Ethereum got clogged through CryptoKitties, a game, and then next cycle, 2021, Steppen, right, and Axie Infinity. So in sort of both the previous cycle, the best consumer application were games. And so I'm ready to bet that we're going to see kind of another cycle where we really onboard the next 10 million, 100 million players through a really, really successful game.
So the gaming industry in general is struggling right now. And I was having a conversation the other day because a friend of a friend is a game designer who is working on a game that was sort of funded during the pandemic, and the kind of demand for it has dried up in the years since that it took to create the game. And it started this conversation of during COVID, when everyone was posting about playing that Nintendo Switch game with the animals that is escaping me right now, and like everyone was inside and video games were just a big part of life for a lot of people. It seemed like video games were just like the popularity of video games is a lot greater than maybe it is today. Have you seen that just in the time that you've been building MagicBlock over the past couple of years, that maybe there was a bit of an like an overestimate in terms of how popular games would be coming out of the COVID era to a world where people just aren't on screens as much?
Yeah, so we started building MagicBlock in 2023. So we were really kind of beyond that initial wave of like influx of new users, and also on the crypto side of thing, that whole like phase where a lot of projects raise a ton of money and start launching NFT and stuff like that. So like I haven't really seen like a stark downtrend, at least from the adoption of our user base. Vice versa, I've seen an increase, but it's completely true that the game industry sort of peaked around COVID, and then right now is kind of going through this phase where there's really a saturation to the game genre that are out there. Roughly half of the revenue in the gaming industry is generated through mobile, and the business model of mobile is completely broken. Aside from the fat fees that the app stores are taking, they're taking a healthy 30% cut on whatever developers are earning. But also, when it comes to monetization, typically 2% of the players are actively paying for a game, and so you have games that have to hyper optimize for ads, or really create these super airtight kind of user acquisition channel where every cent counts, really. And so there's plenty of opportunity for crypto to completely disrupt that model in terms of on so many levels, like payments, discovery, user acquisition, on-chain referrals, new game genre that are not possible off-chain. Like there's so many levels that are ripe for disruption. And so that is another way and another reason why we're so bullish on these experiences.
Do you think there's a public perception problem a bit with integrating crypto into games, just in that people that aren't in the crypto Web3 world already tend to be sort of suspicious of that world?
100%. Yeah. And I think part of that is sort of a knee-jerk reaction compared to the previous cycle, where a lot of projects that were frankly like really bad, like decide to launch NFT or like token because, whatever, like Web3 gaming was the future. Now we're seeing more quality games coming to market, and there's not to say that the perception is completely changed, but it's not definitely has a style as it used to be. And at the same time, it's also often a matter of terminology. So for a fully on-chain game, you don't even have to have an NFT if you don't want, if it doesn't make sense. You can call it a digital asset, and people will be probably fine. And if they don't really like, if you're not using the term crypto, you're using the term forever game or autonomous sword, then they're willing to at least explore. And if the game is fun, then they're hooked. So yeah, I think there's definitely a terminology problem there, but also it's just a matter of having more games and really getting the experiences that we can build on chain on par with what you can currently do off chain.
Yeah, and that's kind of the whole ball game a bit, is just is the game going to be fun? I think, some of the aforementioned like Axie Infinity or whatever, they're not necessarily fun for what they are outside of speculation. And if you can just get these games to market that are really fun, regardless of the crypto element, I think that's the biggest piece.
I mean, yeah, fun or net new and interesting in a new way. Like if a game gets financialized for some reason, and that's fun for some users, that's fine as well, right? Like it's just going to be a game that perhaps the crypto native are playing and not the traditional players, but it's still valuable. And so I really like don't have any preconception of what's fun and what not fun. Means a lot of different things for different people. Like what I find fun might be like disgusting for someone else. And so I think of course a game has to be fun, because like a game by definition is someone overcoming some obstacle and finding pleasure out of that process. That's really what a game is. And so I think it's interesting to move the narrative forward, bring new game genre, innovate on the design space, and then really find out what we can do with these experiences and potentially create digital worlds that can exist forever. I mean, that whole concept, that whole rabbit hole can go in so many different directions, and it's so interesting in and on itself. That can potentially be completely disruptive for compared to the kind of games that we're used to play right now, and especially if you take into account AR, VR, all that sort of incremental technology that are AI in terms of the ability for players to generate their own assets, to generate their own story, to come up with their own lore, and so yeah, just so many interesting things happening all of a sudden and all together, that I cannot not be bullish on games.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds for sure, especially like over the coming months and year. That is unfortunately all the time that we have for today, but it's been a really good conversation. Andrea, thank you for coming on. I'm excited to see sort of what MagicBlock has in store. Congrats on the raise. Best of luck with sort of getting things to mainnet, and thank you very much for coming on Lightspeed.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
This episode would not have been possible without the Sei network. Don't forget, user incentives are coming to Sei from teams like DragonSwap. Make sure to check out Sei today. You can start farming on Sei by visiting dragonswap.app.